Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. International campaigns, a Russian vote tampering scandal, and an imposter taking the win. There's one election that New Zealanders have always taken very seriously. No, it doesn't involve politicians or even human beings. For 2 decades, the public has pored over more than 80 native birds and one controversial bat to crown Bird of the Year. The fun is meant to highlight our native fauna and the fact that New Zealand has one of the highest rates of threatened species in the world. Today on The Front Page, Forest and Bird Chief Executive Nicola Toki is with us to take us through the history and the future of the competition and why we should care. Taking us back 20 years ago, what's the genesis for pitting our native birds against each other? Like, how did this come about?
Yeah, it's such a cool story. So essentially, and I remember this, I just didn't remember it was 20 years ago. So there was a time, a very controversial time in our country that almost divided the nation. And that was in 2005 when RNZ started talking about removing the bird call from Morning Report.
Yeah.
Right? And I think they thought that was probably a really straightforward thing to do. And then the day that they announced it, I think by lunchtime, they'd had something like 1,600 emails from, incensed New Zealanders about how you could possibly take away, this crucial institution of people's mornings. And so off the back of that, a previous employee from Forest and Bird started thinking, actually, this is great. And there were 1 or 2 other countries that had run similar polls about people picking their favourite birds. And so Michael Sabo took it upon himself to look into that and to kick it into gear for New Zealand. And it just grew from there. So, it was an opportunity that Forest and Bird pounced on at the time. And it started with a little email poll that went out to everyone and, not particularly heavily populated in terms of the responses. It probably the zenith of it was the 350,000 votes or thereabouts for the 2023, which was the Pūtiki Tiki. And now we rough enough get sort of between 50 and 60,000 votes from New Zealanders. And, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people are finding it difficult to connect with elections in general with respect to local government and central government elections. But for whatever reason, this tickles people and they want to be engaged and involved in this.
So over the years, Bird of the Year has faced multiple voting scandals. In 2019, there was even some speculation around a Russian hacking scandal. Tell me about that.
Oh, look, we have had so many. I mean, every year there's a controversy of some description. And yes, there was potentially the challenge with the Russian hacking of our election process. We've actually had to get really rigorous with our kind of voting protocols. We had the potential of the Russian hack. We had 1 year. A couple of teenagers got really excited about a particular species of bird and just voted repeatedly and kept cranking up the votes at a time when we really didn't have the controls in place to be able to do anything about it. And so we were having to kind of plead with people to try and follow the rules. And yeah, we've also had the odd hard case thing happen. Of course, we had more than 300,000 votes the year that the Pūtiki Tiki won, thanks to John Oliver and last week tonight. And we had someone repeatedly voting for, I think, the snares-crested penguin and naming it John Oliver. So there's always controversy and it's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, speaking on John Oliver, he launched that worldwide campaign that was 2023, right? Backing the Puteki Teki. His campaign team put up billboards in Mumbai, Tokyo, Paris, London, Brazil, and Wisconsin. And the Puteki Teki won, obviously, by an absolute landslide. What was having that global attention like?
It was exhausting for starters. So there were three of us staff members at Forest and Bird who basically just did a rolling maul of interviews with mostly international media for weeks on end in the lead up to, particularly while John Oliver was, promoting it on his show with his giant Puteki Teki puppet, as well as obviously the billboards he put up all over the world. Turning up, I think, on Jimmy Fallon's show, dressed as a Puteki Teki. And so the interest just grew and reached this sort of fever pitch.
Yes, so it's an interesting bird. There's only 1,000 of them in New Zealand. So I think it's a fine candidate for bird of the century.
Did you contact this organization running this contest before you started campaigning?
We did. Yeah, we didn't just spring up. We said to them, would it be okay if we were campaign managers for a bird? They said, yes, go for it. And I don't think they understood quite what they were unleashing when they said, go for it.
Look, it was fantastic and really described, so not just that year was obviously one out of the box and fantastic that him and his team wanted to be involved in promoting what we consider on our list as one of our underbirds. So, birds who may not necessarily get the same kind of attention, TLC and love that a kakapo or what some of our better known birds might have. But every year, Bird of the Year gets picked up by, the Guardian, Smithsonian, where, it gets reported all over the world, where I'm still reeling from the fact that last year the hoiho won, which is obviously one of New Zealand's iconic species of penguin, something we all hold dear and love, on the $5 note. And some international media described it as, that a smelly penguin had won this important contest. So no, look, it is fantastic because what we've realised over 20 years is that New Zealanders, and we already know this, they really care about our native wildlife, and particularly our birds, which are such a defining characteristic of our nature in New Zealand and part of our national identity.
Well, that's perhaps why it was so controversial. The 2021 winner, the long-tailed bat, won despite not being a bird. Was the organisation prepared for the backlash it received about that decision?
Look, I think we knew that it was going to create consternation. It still does. People still give me a hard time about what about that time a bat won Bird of the Year. And it is really important because the thing about New Zealand's wildlife is New Zealand is a land without teeth, right? So we don't have terrestrial mammals in this country except for two tiny species of bat about the size of, their bodies are about the size of my thumb. And they are in as much trouble as our bird life because of introduced predators like stoats and rats and cats and ferrets and all of that stuff. So it's still a great way to raise awareness of the things that, Forest and Bird is trying to protect and give nature a voice about. And if we just nod over to Te Ao Māori, a bat is encapsulated in the word manu, which we consider the word for bird as something that flies, right? So we reckon we got away with it. It was a wonderful way to engage the New Zealand public in something that wound everyone up a bit.
Well, arguably, if there's only two species of bat, they alternate Bat of the Year each couple of years, right?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? There's still potentially room for the other species of bat to get in there. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So I know that the Entomological Society have started Bug of the Year. There have been other countries, conservation organisations getting in touch with us and talking to us about how they might do Bird of the Year in their respective countries. But there is just something about the way that New Zealanders connect with and identify with our native wildlife. And that's important to us, right? Because 80% of our land birds here in New Zealand are on the threatened species list, are in trouble and need our help. And so one of the biggest challenges that I have found in my career in conservation is trying to tell stories about our native wildlife in such a way that everybody understands that they're special and worth looking after, and that they're in trouble, and that if we look, if we take particular actions, we can do something about it. And conservation's a hard story to sell, because often things are really bad. And so what Bird of the Year enables us to do is focus on the joy and the love that people have for these birds, and let them get super creative about how they're promoting them. I've been looking at some of the online campaigning that is already going on and having a wee giggle with my morning coffee when I see what the various campaign managers are up to.
If you do have, say, a major US talk show host promoting one bird, the result is always going to be obvious, right? Does that take the fun out of it, or is it just the way politics works?
Well, I mean, there are always scandals in politics, aren't there? And we had a bit of feedback at the time about, but this isn't fair because it's sort of taking away from the New Zealand campaigns working hard on their birds. All's fair in love and bird war, I say. And it did a couple of things. So with respect to the pūtiki, and no one could compete with the kind of reach that John Oliver has and the resources he had at his disposal to be able to, put billboards up in the biggest cities all over the world. But it also really kicked that kind of Kiwi spirit into gear, and particularly for the likes of the campaign managers for Kiwi, who then took it upon themselves to rise to the challenge and try and secure more votes as a counter to, the unwanted American influence at the time. So that was quite fun. But, there's no harm in having 100 people from 195 countries around the world engaging in a story about the things that make New Zealand so special.
Now, another controversy, I think there have been 2 birds that have won twice. Should they be able to still compete?
Yes, and so that creates its own challenges. So Kakapo has won twice. Hoiho, I think, has also won twice, last year being the second time around. And we took Kakapo out of the race because people, when they think about our birds, we don't have lions, tigers and bears or a panda here in New Zealand, but probably our charismatic megafauna tend to be things like Kakapo. So we gave Kakapo a breather a few years ago, and people didn't like that either. But what has been fantastic to see this year are the myriad ways that people are getting involved, and we've been working really hard to find ways to amplify the fun of Bird of the Year. So there's like workplace packs that workplaces can download and use to run their own Bird of the Year kind of activities in their offices. We've got, I don't know if you have taken it upon yourself to try nzherald.co.nz yet, but
it's going to be real fun.
Yeah, it's so much fun, right? And at a time in our society, both here in New Zealand and beyond, we are facing a biodiversity crisis, a climate crisis, and the two of those things running up against each other. It can feel quite overwhelming. And I know for me and my staff, it is quite hard to kind of find that kind of thing that sparks joy in the face of quite significant challenges. And so, being able to lead people to some fun stuff, I think, is also what inspires action. Because when people engage in something and they like it and it's fun, they want to know more, and then once they want to know more, they want to do more, and that's been the real key.
Have you had evidence of that? Is all this raising awareness actually contributing to more donations, or?
Yeah. So in the donation total the year that John Oliver hijacked the competition, Forest and Bird received over $1 million in donations just from Bird of the Year. So,
wow.
And we have really neat, supportive business partners who love to get involved in supporting Bird of the Year. And that's the other thing too, like our business partners, when they're doing it, so, we have the likes of Metalbird, and they make a Metalbird Bird of the Year basically the day that the bird is announced. So I went to their office a couple of years ago, and we'd announced the bird, and they were already sketching out the design and about to produce, the thing. We have blunt umbrellas. We have a number of companies very much involved in this, but they're in it the same way that people get involved in the Bird of the Year voting process, because genuinely those businesses love it. They love being part of it. And obviously we are really grateful for the support, because it enables us to go out and do more. And it certainly inspires people who might have just been conservation adjacent, who get drawn into the Bird of the Year drama and fun and controversy, and suddenly become, much more interested and want to take action.
And your site mentions a lack of campaign managers as one of the reasons the full number of species isn't available on the list. Can you tell us a little bit about these campaign managers? Like, who are they? Are they self-appointed? What makes a good campaign manager?
Yeah, so it varies from year to year, but one thing we're really proud of this year is that 100% of the birds that are up for election, for voting, in the poll, have a campaign manager this year. So that's a first for us. That kind of tells us a bit more about how the popularity of Bird of the Year is just growing over the 20 years that it has been around. And campaign managers are volunteer. They get in touch with us. They put their name forward to be associated with a particular bird. Sometimes they are organisations or businesses, sometimes they're towns, like Dunedin basically as a city, through the various museums and, the key players in Dunedin all got together and really pushed Hoihol last year, which probably contributed a lot to its success. We've had politicians. I got in touch with Christopher Luxon's office, for example, before when he was still in opposition about it. So we've had a number of politicians involved over many, many years, and Jacinda Ardern, Helen Clark. Christopher Luxon put his name forward to promote the Rye Bill, which is a little river bird in quite a lot of trouble, found in braided rivers down here, mostly in the South Island, and migrates around the country. But they are really, really special birds, and they're the only bird in the world with a beak that bends to the right, that curves to the right. And I thought, this is a sitter for the National Party, right? So, and at the time, Christopher Luxon did a very clever video about throwing his weight in behind the Rye Bill.
And I appreciate, while this may disappoint many of our supporters, I do this with a very heavy heart, knowing the consequences of the full weight of my decision. Because today, I announce that I am supporting the Rye Bill for Bird of the Year 2022.
So, we've had all kinds of people, and they might be a student, they might just be someone who's really passionate about a particular bird, and they get involved and we work with them, and they do neat work. The best thing that they do, and the thing that everybody loves about this competition, are the online memes and reels, and they get very committed to their campaigns, and we love them for it.
As they should. Of course, I suppose there's probably the birds that always end up in like the top 4 or top 3 or something, right? So the obvious ones, kakapo, you mentioned, kia, kiwi, of course, and the penguins do all right as well. Are there any birds that just always receive the lowest votes? And why is that? Are they the least cute, or are they the ugliest, or the lesser known?
I think often it is lesser known. And so, one of the things that we love and value about Bird of the Year is that it creates conversations all up and down the country about, our various bird species. And the challenge, of course, in this busy world that we live in is New Zealanders, on the one hand, feel very connected to our native wildlife. And on the other hand, I think probably don't know a lot about it, and one of the challenges we have as a conservation organisation is, in New Zealand, we have the highest proportion of threatened species in the world. Many of those obviously are birds. We've already lost many species of birds to extinction in this country because of kind of pests, predators, habitat loss, etc. And so we want to raise awareness of those underbirds in particular. And, David Attenborough often talks about the fact that people won't care about what they haven't experienced. And experiencing it doesn't mean you have to go out into a national park somewhere and discover these birds for yourself. You might experience these birds by learning more about them through this competition and falling a bit in love with the things you didn't know about. And once you experience them, you start to love them. Once you love them, you want to care about them. So you might put a trap up in your backyard, etc. You might start contributing to your local conservation project.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nicola.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.